It takes two people to create one fine art wildlife image. Yes, two people, not one, but two. Hey guys, this is Ijaz. I am a fashion and a wildlife photographer. Before we can start talking about why don't we just talk about what is the job of a photographer and then what is the job of an artist, right? So, in my opinion, a job of a photographer is to take a perfectly exposed photograph, meaning your shutter has to be perfect, your f-stop has to be perfect, the light has to be perfect, the colors have to be perfect. There are so many things that a photographer has to think about before he can say, oh, I have a perfect image. In my opinion, that's the job of a photographer, to make sure that everything comes out absolutely perfect. Now, you may argue and say, hey, but these days you have an iPhone and you go click and everything is perfect. Yeah, everything is perfect. You can't really take that image of an iPhone and go sell it in an art gallery, right? It's a photo. It's a photograph. Basically, it's a photograph. So you, as a photographer, has done your job to take a photograph. Perfect exposure. Or you can be one of those where you turn everything to automatic in your camera and you go click and boom, it's done, right? That's your job. And whether you do it manually or whether you do it with an automatic setting on your camera, it does not really matter. A photograph is a photograph is a photograph. A photographer's job is to capture the best photograph there is. The lighting exists, the environment exists, whatnot. So the job of a photographer is to capture everything that exists. And now the job of an artist is to capture or create everything that does not exist, because an artist wants to express himself. My artistic expression, I must create something that doesn't exist, that's in here in my brain. And at that moment, your photograph goes from being a photograph to an image, goes from being a wildlife photo to being a fine art wildlife image, right? That's the difference. Now, these two images at the back that you see, yes, the photographer in me captured those, but the artist in me took those, nurtured them to the way I want my audience to see and feel. More feel, right? I want my audience to feel something. It's my artistic expression that I want to evoke emotions in my audience. And that is the difference between a photographer and an artist. So that's the reason why I say it takes two people within you, of course. It takes two people to create a fine art image. So when I say two people, normally it's one inside of you who's a photographer who has all the technical knowledge to make things perfect, and the other one who's an artist who has all the imagination to go and create something out of the photograph the photographer is passing along to you, right? Inside your brain. But that wasn't my case. My case, when I first picked up the camera, I didn't know anything about lighting, exposure, f-stop, nothing at all. But I wanted to be an artist, meaning I wanted to paint with the camera, meaning I wanted to paint with light. So instead of picking up a brush and saying, okay, I'm going to start painting, I said, no, I am going to paint with the camera. The fascination about having a camera was amazing. Oh my God, I have a camera and I can do this to it and I can do that to it. But bottom line, if I took the camera into the field, and since I didn't know how to be a photographer, it was just wasted because I was coming back with images that were underexposed, overexposed, blurry. I mean, name it. It was horrible. And then I met few people in the industry who helped me with understanding and helped me with getting my exposures correctly. All right. So one of them is Alden Wallace. I mean, was he was unbelievable. He still is unbelievable. You guys should go check out his website. And he does portraits and so on. And what a creative human being. But I didn't use him for his creativity. I had him give me inputs on the creativity, but he was the photographer. He was the one when I was starting out. He was the one who was creating perfect photographs for me. And then after, when I say creating perfect photographs, he was with me. I'm speaking about fashion. Okay. When he was with me, he was helping me create the perfect light. Hey, Alden, I want this, and I want this, and I want this, and I want this. So I was expressing to Alden what I wanted, and Alden was creating the light that I wanted to be an artist. And of course, in working with him and working with many others, I learned how to work with a camera. My tools, my brush, so to speak, was getting better and better and better because I was asking Alden, hey, why are you doing this and why aren't you doing that? Why should the f-stop be XYZ and why should the shutter speed be XYZ? And the more I asked questions, the more I learned from him. I mean, of course, I didn't go to school for this. I didn't go to school for photography. I learned from being around people such as Alden who were experts at lighting and experts as well as being an artist himself. What he brought to the table for me was the fact that he showed me and helped me take beautiful photos. So that's person number one. For me, I got lucky. I found people such as Alden who worked with me to make my images perfect as a photographer. Then comes the artist. Now, I didn't have anyone to go and study how to be an artist, but I was always a storyteller even when I was a little child. So, telling a story in an two-dimensional image was my goal. How do I tell a story? What can I do to tell a story? So once I started asking those questions and Alden started pumping out all these beautiful and perfectly exposed images for me. When I say pumping out, I was taking the images, but of course Alden was helping me take them and make them perfect. Then I would pass it to the photographer inside in my brain. I mean, the artist inside my brain, and the artist inside the brain would say, okay, what can I do to make it XYZ? I want my models in those days. Of course, it wasn't wildlife, but I want my models to look powerful, or I want my models to tell this XYZ story, or I want this from my models. And then I would take those images and change them. So I applied exactly the same thing when I got into fine art, wildlife photography. At this point, I had already learned my camera, I had learned my ISOs, and I had learned my f-stops and so on and so forth. So now I know which brush to pick up if I wanted to shoot horses. When I say shoot, I mean photograph horses. Or which brush to pick up if I want to photograph a bird, meaning what kind of camera, what kind of lens. So all that education that I learned from Alden and others, I applied to my wildlife. So now I became a photographer that can go out in the field, come back with perfectly exposed images. Lucky for me that I had an artist inside myself as well that kept on asking me questions like, okay, you are going to take your image from here, which is going to be perfectly exposed. Okay, perfect. Now, what happens? What do you want to tell your audience as an artist? What story do you want to tell? And that basically helps you with the composition in the field as a artist. So now you have the combination of a photographer who's giving you a perfect exposed image, and then you have a artist in your brain which is telling you what do you want to tell your audience and how do you want them to feel. That's one of the reasons why I say the difference between a photographer and a fine artist is that a photographer is more of an engineer and a artist is more of a dreamer, and he creates in his brains, and he does XYZ. I just wanted you guys to know that if you want to be a fine art wildlife photographer or fine art photographer or you want to be an artist that paints with the camera, then learn the camera perfectly so this way you can expose correctly, and then send your artist which is in your brain to town. Let him go create as much as possible. So I hope I've simplified this artist versus a photographer. They're two different things altogether. One is an architect and the other one is a interior designer. If you know what each job is, a photographer's job and an artist's job, reaching the fine art position, reaching the artist position will become much, much easier for you. I will speak to you guys later, and thank you. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.